Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this evening's meeting of Waukegan City Council's Public Works and Infrastructure Committee meeting, starting at 6:15 on the dot. And I'd like a roll call, please.
Alderman Newsom.
Present.
Alderman Kirkwood.
Present.
Alderman Bolton.
Present.
Alderman Seeger.
Present.
Alderman Turner.
Present. Thank you. I'd like a motion for to approve the meeting minutes of the what was that? The June 19th, June 17th Public Works meeting.
Aye.
Second.
Second by
I'll second.
motion by Alderman Kirkwood, second by Alderman Newsom. Roll call, please.
All those in favor?
Alderman Newsom.
Aye.
Alderman Kirkwood.
Aye.
Alderman Bolton.
Aye.
Alderman Seeger.
Aye.
Alderman Turner.
Aye. Thank you all very much. And audience time. Is there any member of the audience who has comments or questions for any item on tonight's agenda? Going once, going twice, 3 times. Thank you. There are being no audience time, no old business, no new business. We'll move into item 4, reports and communications. I'm delighted to introduce the team from ShotSpotter Corporation. Is it
It's ShotSpotter. You got it correct.
ShotSpotter? Thank you. Why don't you introduce yourselves, and then we're going to stand by for your presentation. You're going to make your presentation using the screen behind us, so the committee members, we can kind of move out towards the audience if you want, or if you can turn and see it from here, that's fine. But the floor is yours.
Thank you. Kevin, do you want to come on up?
What are you going to do?
Screen. There it
Yeah, you can come up. We would like to start by thanking you all for inviting us here this evening to talk with you about how ShotSpotter can help you to address gun violence here in Waukegan. I'm Trish Lane. I'm a sales director with ShotSpotter. Been with the company now about 4 years, and what's relevant about my background is I've spent most of my career in law enforcement technology. So I'm very familiar with the law enforcement environment and the different kinds of technologies that a police department would use. I am honored to have with me this evening Kevin Johnson. He is a former deputy chief, retired, out of Chicago Police Department. He spent the end of his career as deputy chief over community policing. He also was instrumental in implementing ShotSpotter back in 2017 in one of the most violent districts in Chicago and really getting maximum benefit out of that program. Kevin will be here with me after a brief presentation to answer any questions that you may have. And he can talk more about how CPD uses it and the other customers that use it here in Illinois and other states that he works with to make sure those same customers get the benefit that he got out of the system when he implemented it in his district in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kevin. So I would like to begin this evening by telling you all a story. Tonight, here in Waukegan, while most of your residents are asleep, it is very likely that there will be gunfire. And if you're like most other cities in this country, it is very likely that no one will call 911. And since your officers don't know about the gunfire, they won't respond. Unfortunately, as that scenario plays itself out over and over again, it will lead to the normalization of gun violence. The perpetrators will feel emboldened to shoot their weapons, increasing the likelihood of homicides and non-fatal shootings. And at the same time, the rest of your community will live in fear. They're wondering why you're not there. When they look out that window, they don't see a police response when there's a shooting in this city. But at the same time, they think that the police department knows about the shooting because, as the chief can tell you, they think, everyone in the community, that the police know about everything that happens within the city. So if they think that the police know about all of this gunfire, but that they don't show up when it occurs, what will they think about their police department? They'll think that they don't care. And you all know, and we know at ShotSpotter, that that is absolutely not true. All of this creates a vicious cycle where gun violence continues unabated, where your agency, the police department, is perceived as being deliberately indifferent. There's an erosion of trust in the community, and your officers are put at risk. And it doesn't have to be like this. So, why is ShotSpotter here this evening talking to you about why you should bring ShotSpotter Respond gunshot detection to Waukegan? Well, ShotSpotter's been helping communities stay safe for over 25 years now. We currently serve over 120 cities across the U.S., many similar in size to the city of Waukegan. We have surveyed our customers every year, and in that survey, they tell us 90% of them agree that the value and benefit of ShotSpotter either meets or exceeds their expectations. In addition, our 35 patents distinguish us in the public safety industry and protect our technology. So why should you consider bringing ShotSpotter to Waukegan? So when we started the discussion, I showed a slide that had 80% on it and talked about the underreporting of gunfire, or at least I referenced it. What that means is that when we look at our ShotSpotter cities, places that have us today, and we look when they have a ShotSpotter alert, when there's gunfire, is there a corresponding 911 call for service? And when we compare that data, we come up with what you see here on the screen. These cities, a random sample that show most of the time that gunfire percentage is under 20%, meaning that at least 80% of the time in most of these cities, the police are not aware of gunfire when it's actually occurring. So why don't people call 911? I'm going to walk you through a couple of reasons that we hear when we go out and meet with community groups and different stakeholders to query them as to why they may not call 911 when there's gunfire. First, they may not actually recognize it as gunfire. They may think it's a firework or some other sound. They're just not sure, and they don't want to be the one to cry wolf and call 911. Another one we hear is redundancy. It's when I think my neighbor down the street might place a phone call because he or she is probably closer to that event. It sounded to me like it was in that part of the block, and maybe they know more about it, and I don't want to place that redundant call to 911. The other reason is retaliation. When folks call 911, that officer goes to their address. Well, folks worry if they call 911 that perhaps the shooter will see the police at their house and they'll become the next target. And lastly, and worst of all, is when gunfire becomes normal, everyone gets resigned to it and no one calls 911. So let's look at what happens today in Waukegan without ShotSpotter. So at least 80% of the time when someone fires a gun, the chief and his officers would not know about it. So, as an officer might drive by that shooting scene, as you see in the center of the screen, unprepared because they at this time do not know about it. Let's say someone does call 911. So there is a caller in this instance. A responding officer from across town will then go driving through that threat zone to get to the caller's location without even knowing that that's what they're doing. Then they'll get to the caller's house, but there's still a considerable distance away from that event. One of the things that ShotSpotter has done is we've also compared when we do have a corresponding 911 call, when there's a ShotSpotter alert, how far away are they from that actual event? The average search area here turns out to be 780 feet away from the actual event. meaning that those officers will fail to be in the right location. They won't be seen by the community members there because they're in the wrong spot, leading to that situation where you look out the window and you don't see a police response when there's gunfire. They will fail to find evidence, and worse, they may fail to find a victim that could be bleeding out and may die or be seriously injured due to their injuries. So what happens if you don't do anything? What happens if there's no action? Well, that lack of an effective police response fuels these negative perceptions, which really dilute all the chief's efforts, all the mayor's efforts at community collaboration and engagement. It also diminishes the quality of life for the citizens in Waukegan. It causes children to not play outside when they come home from school. They have to stay inside. And it causes young men to often pick up guns for their own or their family's protection. So what if there was a way to address what has to be concerns here in the city of Waukegan about officer safety, public perception, community trust, and violence reduction? With ShotSpotter, your story can have a different outcome. When someone fires a gun in Waukegan with ShotSpotter, even in the absence of any 911 call, your officers will be dispatched to the direct and correct location of the shooting in real time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through 3 chapters that talk about what we do. First is detect. How do we detect gunfire, get officers there quickly? The second is how we protect officers so they can better protect the community. And third is how you can use ShotSpotter to increase your community engagement. So starting with detect. So I'm going to walk you through a little animation here that really talks about how ShotSpotter works. But one of the things the animation doesn't talk about is that if you think of ShotSpotter, think of it like your cell phone plan. You subscribe to a service. You don't own the cell towers. You don't install the cell towers. You don't maintain any of that infrastructure. ShotSpotter does all of that. All our customers do is subscribe to our gunshot detection service. We take care of all the rest. So what we do is we come into a city and we build out a sensor array. You can think of it as a dome of protection. And we determine that area working with the police department and the city to figure out where your gun crime is. We use data to inform the location of the coverage area. Then in that coverage area, we build out what we call a sensor array. And we put approximately 20 to 25 sensors per square mile on the rooftops of buildings or on utility poles. Then, when someone fires a gun, the sound of that muzzle blast radiates outward. The acoustic sensors pick up that impulsive sound, and we have machine algorithms that classify it as gunfire or not. If they determine, the machines that is, that it's gunfire, it is then transmitted using cell phone technology to our Incident Review Center in Newark, California, or our new Incident Review Center in Washington, D.C. We have redundant centers out there now. So that sound gets classified. Triangulation, depending on how many sensors hear it, pinpoints that location. It gets to our IRC, where we have trained acoustic technicians that then listen to the audio files. They look at the sensor participation to determine direction and a few other attributes. They may add some expertise to that event, whether or not it's a multiple shooter situation, whether or not it's a high capacity weapon. They can add all those tags so that the responding officers have more situational awareness when they get dispatched to the scene. So here they are looking at the sensor participation. That's a picture of an acoustic wave, doing some other vetting, and then they publish that all out in under 60 seconds, giving that officer a precise location where that gunfire event happened. It goes immediately to your 911 center, to the squad cars, to the officers' phones. It can also go to their watches, and it can be either Android or iOS devices for a watch. So that's how we detect gunfire. The other things that ShotSpotter allow you to do is protect your personnel and also protect your plan in public. So let's first talk about protecting your officers. What you're seeing on your screen here is what a laptop display or in the squad car, what it would look like to the responding officers. So when someone fires a gun, they'll be alerted by a sound on their device that will tell them to look at ShotSpotter Respond, and they'll see what you see here on the screen. The alert contains a satellite view of the incident. Oh, sorry. That's the sound that's supposed to make them look at their screen. So they get the satellite view of the incident that you see here, where you can see in the center of the screen the number of rounds fired. I'm going to have to put my glasses on if I want to tell you how many. It is 16 rounds in that little bubble, and that's important because we're going to come back to that in a second. They also have that white halo around it. That's what we call our 25-meter or 82-foot radius where folks can look for ground truth. They might find shell casings. They might find a shooter. That's their search area. We also provide the officer with the nearest street address. It's important to have that for a reference, but we always tell our officers, go to the dot, not the address, because the dot could be in an alley or back behind a house, in a backyard. It may not be in front of the house. We also give them on here a tag that tells them whether or not there are multiple that's the timestamp, excuse me. Then we tell them whether or not it's a multiple shooter and whether or not it's a high capacity weapon. We also break down those 16 rounds. So when I pointed that out earlier, here in this report that the officers can send to themselves, they can see the exact position of each shot. It's really important in a multiple shooter situation to have that kind of information so you can determine who shot first. Now here is another example of a gunfire alert on your screen. And if an officer clicks on the blue arrow, they can hear the gunshots themselves. And in this last example, which was an actual shooting in Chicago, let's say someone called 911 in this instance about something that they thought were fireworks. Thankfully, in this case, we alerted on it. It wasn't a 911 call. And we noted that it was a high-capacity weapon involved and multiple shooters. And then, by looking at Google Street View, you can see here that there's a railroad bridge, right? So then you have to think about how do you tactically respond, right? Do you send 2 officers? Do you send 4? How do you deal with this? It's not a firework call that's 780 feet you're away from and don't know how to respond to it. We give you that situational awareness through the tags we put on the calls, plus the ability to look at Street View. Another thing the officers have at their fingertips, and it can be very helpful for meetings as well, whether you're meeting with school officials to look at where kids might be exposed to gunfire. If you look at the school district to see if there's a lot of shooting activity, find out what kids live in an area. You can look at Respond really quickly for a 3-day or 24-hour, 3-day, and 7-day view. That's what you're seeing here on the screen behind me. This one's 24 hours, this one's 3 days, and that one's 7 days. So you can take a look at that volume and use it to inform other people and use it in meetings, certainly community meetings, to talk about some of the shooting activity in the community. The other thing you can do, and this example out of Oakland really highlights this well, you know, sometimes you may have folks wondering why they're not seeing more of a police presence in their neighborhood. So that's the area I'm highlighting in yellow. But if you look at the view like we just did, 3 days, or 24 hours, 3 days, and 7 days, and you look here, there's 24 hours, 3 days, and now you're going to have 7 days. You can really clearly see here where you might want to put your resources in that area where you've got more of your activity, and it makes it very easy to show to people and explain it to them in a way that they can understand it. So lastly, we're going to talk about Connect. And ShotSpotter helps you connect in a couple of different ways. One, we connect those officers to the crime scene where they can collect critical evidence. Second, and I'll touch on this, is how it can multiply existing strategies like a community policing strategy, and that's certainly something Kevin can also address when we do the Q&A. And you can use it to bring create a stronger connection here with the community. So with ShotSpotter, when someone fires a gun, your officers are going to be directed to that exact precise location where a shooting happened. That gives them the chance to work that crime scene. They can collect evidence. I'm going to use a term here I know the chief is very familiar with, which is NIBIN, where you collect these shell casings, you put them into NIBIN for simplicity's sake, and you start to link these casings to other crime scenes and to guns, and you get these shooters off the streets, which is sort of the essence of precision policing, is getting the small number of folks that are driving most of your violence here in the city. You'll also now, when folks look out their windows, because you have ShotSpotter and you'll know about all of the shootings, they will see a police response. They'll see the Waukegan Police Department come. They will see you guys show up, potentially arrest a shooter, because as I said, they drive, a small portion of those folks drive most of your violence here in Waukegan. They will also see the police department attend to victims of shootings and render that life-saving first aid while they're waiting for transport to the trauma center, because time is tissue. They'll also see them set up a crime scene, talk to witnesses, collect more evidence. And one thing that we always recommend as part of the best practices at ShotSpotter, before the officers leave that scene, if they can that evening or go back the next day, and knock on doors around that crime scene and check on residents, more of a welfare check, see how they're doing. Is there anything they need? Did they hear anything? Is there anything they want to offer up, about what's going on in the neighborhood? And just generally check on them. And if they're not there, leave a door hanger for them so that they know that you were there. One last thing here I'd like to close with is the city of Cincinnati has been a longtime customer of ShotSpotters. I think they've been on now for at least 4.5, maybe 5 years. And they were pretty thoughtful about their deployment. So in one of their communities, Price Hill, they conducted a survey when the Cincinnati Police Department came in 6 months after they started that service to see what the residents felt about the program. Approximately 95% of the respondents within that coverage area in Price Hill thought that agreed or strongly agreed that ShotSpotter technology was an effective way to reduce crime. And 89% of those respondents said that they would recommend ShotSpotter to other communities in Cincinnati. And all leading to making your community safer when you bring ShotSpotter in as part of your community policing strategy. So what about questions? And I'll invite Kevin to come on up because I'm sure you have lots of questions for him.
Thank you, Trish. Did you say it was 117 cities that have your system?
Over 120 now. Yeah, we actually list them all on our website. There's a page, and I can send you the link, and I can send it through the chief, and he can send it out to all of you. We list all of our customer cities on there.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chief. Okay.
Thank you.
It's an excellent presentation. I want to thank you both for coming up. And the chief is passing out stats, shots fired in the city of Waukegan over the last year. And it's broken down by where you see, excuse me, beat number. They call them beats. We call them wards. So that's beat 1 is ward 1, et cetera. And I use these stats during my ward meeting on Saturday. So let's see if I can find it for you. Beat 1. So in beat 1, I'm just going to go through this really quickly so we have some reference for all of our council or committee members. So in beat 1 or ward 1 in the last year, there were 233 shots fired, calls reported. In beat 2, there were 122. In beat 3, there were 144 shots fired calls. Beat 4 had 103 shots fired calls. Beat 5, Edie, your ward had 98 shots fired calls in a year's time. My ward, Ward 6, we had 116. Felix in Ward 7, you had 87 shots fired calls.
I'm moving there.
Ward 8 is Lynn Florian, and she had 37 calls for shots fired. And then, Tom, you had 50. Right?
And what was the first ward again?
First ward was
You get a
122.
do something.
1,000 and how many?
233. 233. So, yeah. So you can see that, you know, as I've remarked many times in the past, it is a significant amount of shots fired calls. But I don't want to take up the floor. I really want to throw this open to questions from the committee and others who are not on the committee. Lynn
Like me.
Florian.
Did you want your committee members to go first?
Well, Sylvia, go ahead.
I'm very impressed. I think I fill up the page. I'd like to buy 10. Thank you so much. No, but on the serious side, I'm very impressed. It's definitely needed in my ward. Can you elaborate on what iOS watches and devices are? You had mentioned that.
Yeah, and I sometimes say that and I sometimes don't. So what we will do in a city is if the police department will allow officers to put it on their personal phones or their personal watches, right? If you have an Apple Watch or an Android watch, we can send it out to that as well.
And what is the closest, other than Chicago and the one you mentioned, what other cities utilize this system or this?
So, yeah, I'll tell
technology?
you, we have a number of customers here in Illinois. It's easy to say North Chicago because they're right there. They're really close. But we have Peoria, Rockford, Kankakee, well, that's Wisconsin.
Well, but it's close.
It is close. And they're a great customer, by the way. And Springfield, down in the southern part of the state. I think that's...
Key in Springfield.
You got to speak in the mic. I can't hear you, sir.
Yeah, sorry. Oh,
Yes, just basically for Illinois, we have, like Trish was saying, Freeport, Rockford, Peoria, Springfield, Calumet City. Those among some of the main ones we have right now.
Wow, it's impressive.
You had mentioned something about NIBIN or something, if I'm mispronouncing. What is that?
so it's the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. And it's through
Layman
the...
terms.
It's a big term. It's through the ATF. And Kevin, I know you have a lot of experience working with NIBIN. You want to talk about that?
Yes, just briefly, what it is basically it's a correlation center where, say, officers go to a scene and they recover shell casings on the ground. They take those shell casings, they work with ATF, and they enter them into the system, their machine. And they run the machine for evidence and what have you, and they're able to use those shell casings to connect them to guns and criminals. So it's a very effective tool how your department works with ATF to solve crimes and get guns and criminals off the street.
Great, thank you. Okay.
And I don't know if we elaborate the cost of this.
So the cost is really easy, and I can actually display it if that's helpful for you guys. I think I have it on here. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we charge a subscription fee. You subscribe to a service. So the annual subscription for 1 square mile of coverage is $70,000 a year. In year one, we have a fee for service initiation, which is $10,000 per square mile. That's for our installers, our project manager, who comes here and gets permissions to install our sensors on the rooftops of buildings and works with the utility to make all that happen. And then there's one flat fee for what we call onboarding, training, and best practices, which is Kevin working with our training team to come in here, work with you guys on policy, and get everyone trained up before you go live. So depending on the number of square miles, the number goes up. If you go a little bit bigger, it doesn't have to be even square miles, by the way. I mean, we don't tend to do anything much less than 1, but it could be 1.5, it could be 2. It's whatever the crime data says your coverage area should be, and then whatever you all can afford.
What's the cost in year 2 and year 3?
So if you had 1 square mile and that was it, in year 2 it would be $70,000, and in year 3 it would be $70,000.
Got it. All right, cool. Thank
I
you.
have a question regarding the price too. Are there any hidden fees? I've read that if the amount of shots fired goes up, then our fees could go up.
It doesn't work that way, but there are 2 fees I didn't mention. There are 2 things I didn't mention. So what you see here, it says without API. We have what's called an application programming interface. What it does is it sends ShotSpotter data out one way, our gunshot data, really just date and timestamps, to other systems, most commonly to a camera system. So if you can imagine, if you have cameras in your coverage area and they had this API, you could actually turn those cameras in the direction of a gunfire event. You could do the same thing with license plate readers. There's a couple of common integrations like that people will do. But what I've seen here in the Midwest is that people don't tend to get the API in year 1 if they get it at all. It just depends on what you have for other systems that you want to tie into.
Okay.
Do you have to leave that system in that area for 3 years or more or whatever?
So I'll come back to that in 1 second. So one thing, because I didn't answer your question completely, was that we also have fees for our, what we call litigation support. We provide expert witness testimony in court. We testify to our science. We've been past most of the Daubert and Fry challenges across the country, actually. And these folks charge an hourly fee. I think it's $3.50 for their time per hour. And usually your prosecutors pay for that because they're the ones that are using them as experts in their court cases.
I know you talked about Chicago having the cameras the system has shots fired decreased in the years that you've had this?
I'll give you my experience on it. When we onboarded with ShotSpotter in 2017, we were just coming out of we almost called it the most impossible year ever in Chicago. Was 2016. Our murder rates went through the roof. Our shootings went through the roof. Back then, Mayor Emanuel and then Superintendent Johnson made a decision to arm the police with as much technology as they can that we can fight crime smarter. It got to that point. So now they picked 2 districts, the Inglewood District on the south side of Chicago and the Lawndale District on the west side of Chicago, where I was the commander of the Lawndale District. Those 2 districts alone, the 7th and the 11th District, accounted for 45% of all violent crime in the city of Chicago.
Wow.
Just 2 districts. So the decision was made to implement ShotSpotter, Hunch Lab, predictive policing technology back then, utilizing the cameras. They created SDSC rooms, or strategic decision support center rooms. There were like mini information rooms in both of those districts where I had myself and officers embedded and analysts to study crime and make out daily briefing reports, and I could act instantly in real time. If a situation changed, I need to move my officers here, move my officers there, get some outside help or outside unit resources. I was able to do that. Utilizing that technology along with ShotSpotter, I was able to reduce crime in my district within 1 year, 33%. My fellow commander's district in Inglewood, 67% in 1 year. So we did see benefits. It's a matter, and the things that matter the most to me with ShotSpotter and coming on, officer safety. I spent 30 years with the Chicago Police Department. I never wanted to see my officers hurt, injured, not having the best information possible. Situational awareness that Trish mentioned is huge, because now you're just going to respond to a call for service. Somebody's calling, hey, I'm hearing shots over here on this area. The officers don't know what they're getting into. Now they know what they're getting into. Also with ShotSpotter is saving lives. Those officers are getting there faster. They're getting a chance to save someone's life, catch someone in the commission of a crime, make an arrest. That's huge and that's important. And one thing that really impressed me about ShotSpotter, it gave my officers the ability to do community engagement. Even if no one shot, I impressed upon my officers to go to those homes. Hey, I'm Officer Johnson. I came over here on a ShotSpotter alert. What's going on in the neighborhood? How can we help you? Because you know there's somebody, and some mother and children, after hearing numerous shots, somebody's in a tub hiding. And you can't live like that. You can't.
Right.
So now we started getting that open line of communication up with them. Now I got to the point, well, first couple of times you're going to get away from my house. I'm not going to say anything, or they're operating out of fear. I used to call it putting coins in the bank. You keep doing it, you keep doing it, you keep doing it, asking about them. One point, somebody's going to come out and give you some information you could use to solve crime in your neighborhood and make that community safer.
I agree. All right, thank you, Deputy Chief.
Thank you.
Leon, you had a question?
Yeah, Chief, I'd like to hear from you a little bit. How many square miles do you think we would need to do in order to have some kind of effect?
Alderman, I think what we need to do is, so the entire city of Waukegan is 26 square miles. So I think what we need to do is take a look at where our highest volume is. I will tell you, I think I met Trish, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. I'm not sure where we started discussing it in an area. And for Alderman Bolton to know, part of your ward is already covered by ShotSpotter. The project that
more.
you're in with North Chicago that AbbVie's paying for. So part of that does cover your ward. But I think at that time we looked at 3 key areas. One of them, the 10th and Jackson area. One of them was another area along 10th Street, I think. And the other one was Jackson and Edwards. But that was a couple and a half years ago. We looked at a heat map. So we'd have to redo that again. So, it depends on how high up on the priority list we want to go, what we're able resource-wise to go. I can recommend quite a bit, honestly. But I'd rather reserve that a little bit till we have a little more discussion about logistics.
I have
And-
a question, Chief. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I still have a couple more questions, sorry. So how long does it stay in one place? Like, once you put it in, how long does it stay there?
Thank you. That's a good question. And lets me answer the rest of your question, which I didn't get to. And I had a conversation with the chief about this on Friday. So, interestingly enough, one of the things about gunfire is what we see is we don't tend to displace it, we suppress it. Right? So we tamp it down, but it doesn't tend to move that much. Now, there can be situations where it actually does move. Let's say you had a large, housing authority property, that being removed or rebuilt somewhere else might cause a change. But we don't see a lot of that. So what we did, though, is we came up with a pricing model to say, okay, if someone does want to move it, let's just charge them a service fee, and it's based on the number of square miles. It's usually a custom price, but it's usually not that expensive. To go put some more sensors in where they want them, chances are we will not move the sensors that are already there. So that's kind of the model we came up with, but we'd never used it. And then I had a customer, and it's the only time we've ever done it, in St. Louis County, Missouri. Have contract cities that the police, it's a county police department, but these cities come on and say, okay, we want you to provide policing services. One of those cities said, hey, we don't want you to provide policing services for us anymore. We're going to go do this other thing. And they said, that's fine, but we're going to take your ShotSpotter away. So all we did was we decommissioned those sensors and shut them off, and then took an equal amount of square mileage and put it in another area where they wanted it. And I think that it was really nominal. It was a couple years ago that we did that. And I think we charged them like $7,500 to do it. It wasn't that much. So it was pretty inexpensive.
Okay, and one more question. So recently there was an article I read about this kind of technology, and they said that when they looked at the statistics, it didn't necessarily reduce the amount of crime, but it increased the number of calls. So you were sending police out on a wild goose chase, basically, I would say, and not necessarily reducing crime. I know you speak, but you also mentioned 2 or 3 other things you did at the same time. You did ShotSpotter, so I don't know that you could say ShotSpotter alone did that, but...
No. And we never say that it does. We are a part of whatever strategy an agency is going to use to address gun violence. We're one piece of that. Right? You really do need the wraparound services. You need the street outreach. You need group violence intervention. There's other things. Any kind of community work you do is helpful along with it, and working with the faith community. There's so many other things that are important to that reduction. I think I know the report, but here's what I would say is that because we don't tend to cover whole cities, we're only in a small area in most places we are. So let's say in a city like I'll pick an example like Toledo. So we've got, I think, 9 square miles now in Toledo. It's not the whole city that we cover. So the calls for service don't go up that much. It's not citywide, because I know sometimes people think when they bring ShotSpotter in, it's going to be too big of a lift on the police department. You know, the one good thing about it is we tell you right where to go. You're not out there hunting around in the wrong location for shell casings or witnesses, because you're not going to find them, right? That call didn't come from where the shooting happened. So you can be a little bit more effective. So in one sense, you could look at it as a force multiplier. And I also always go back to, you know, just look at our installed base with the over 120 customers that renew their subscriptions annually, and in many cases expand those subscriptions. I don't think all those customers would stick with ShotSpotter if they thought we were running them around on a wild goose chase.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We got about 5 minutes before council starts. Alderman Kirkwood, thank you.
In terms of the data that is being used, and certainly we have 9 wards, so some wards report more so than others. So once Chief looks at that data, and you know we can't cover the whole city, but how do we decide, you know, where is all the technology should go? You know, so it's not targeted on the south side or the west side, because I saw those numbers where it's 56, 78, 113, but several parts of our community do not report it. You know, like last night I heard gunshots, you know, in the 4th Ward. So my concern is, that's why I raised the question earlier in terms of how are we going to decide, if we go this route, where we will concentrate our efforts, and then decide, is it really working for us? Because to pay $70,000, we need to make sure we're getting our money's worth.
So I'm going to ask Kevin to talk about how he works with customers to look at efficacy in just a second. And I'd go to the chief for the data.
Sure, I'll answer. Well, Alderman, very similar to like when Alderman Florian had asked me, you know, how much I thought we needed or where we needed to be. And I think what you're going to come up with is, I'm going to provide you data. I'll provide you a little backup to that data, but it's also going to come down to what the alderman and ultimately what the mayor direct me to do as far as a policy goes. I mean, if if the policy, or we decide that it's going to be how we're going to respond to it, and really how we're going to respond to it. And I'll give you input. I've got a way. I believe very much. Trish pointed out very much. I like the technology, but there is other services and resources that need to go with the technology.
Right.
And it's like a good community policing program. Quite honestly, I remember years ago when we had a big push in community policing, 95, 96, our calls went up. And everybody was saying, oh my God, you got a community policing model. Why did your calls go up? This doesn't work. And quite honestly, that means it's working, because people now trust the police that when they call, something's going to happen. An officer's going to get there in a couple minutes. I'm sure that each one of you have received a call, because I know we've talked about it, where you get a call about loud music and it takes us an hour or an hour and a half to get there on a Saturday night, and people are upset. They want to know why we're not there right away. Well, you know, as we work in this priority call system, that's what happens. And it's things like that model that erode the trust. And so with technology like this, the policy decisions that your group makes as the aldermen in the council committees will direct the policy in the way we go. So if that answers a question on my end.
Yes, it does.
Great.
And that's where I'm at, straight with you. I'm not trying to sell anything. And everybody that knows me knows I'm not trying to buy anything either, but we'll use our money in a smart way.
All right. Okay.
I invited them up, and that's what
I have one last
thank you.
question for
Chief, just,
Wallace. I apologize. You had indicated that we already have one in the 1st Ward.
There's a system in North Chicago that reports shots in your ward.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yeah. Well, so we detect outside the coverage area. We also have sensors outside the coverage area to detect into it. But what happens is we don't necessarily locate it accurately when it's outside the coverage area. But that audio that we notify, or that North Chicago notifies Chief Wallace about, can be useful in your investigations and can give you some idea of gunfire activity right along that border that you share with North Chicago.
All right, great, thank you. All right, so we're going to bring this committee meeting to an end right at 7 o'clock. I'd like a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Newsom, second by Alderman Kirkwood. All in favor? Aye. Thank you all, and thank you, Trish. Thank you, Deputy Chief, for coming up, making a wonderful presentation.